So what I'll do is I'll start broadcast, queue up and then I'll get it started. Hello, everyone out there. My name is Craig Spilker, and you are live with us here for another episode of the AMP webinar series. Like I said, my name is Craig Spilker, and with me today, a treat for everyone. If someone has not got a chance to listen to her and what she does with teams, it's amazing. Liz Hall, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Craig. Thanks for having me.
So we are live right now, coming to you live and in living color, I guess, from the old pub here in downtown Lincoln, Nebraska. Giovanna, our assistant here, she has been resourceful. Our entire team got us ready to go as we had some internet trouble. Darn, technology, it's Murphy's Law, right? If it's going to go wrong, it will. And so we made it. But we have a live audience here, and so we're excited. I'm happy you joined us today. So let's get right into it. If you've never listened to an AMP webinar series before and you're wondering, okay, what is this and why are we doing this? Well, we bring each month individuals who, in the world of engagement, employee motivation, and everything in between, people who can really come and talk about effective ways to motivate your team, and that's definitely with Liz today. But here's the things with this, okay? 3 rules with the AMP webinar series. We're not going to take forever. So we're going to be around 45 minutes. It's going to be meaningful. Liz has got some great stuff for you that I'm excited to get into in social. We want to hear with you. So to get in touch with us today, if you have questions or you want to ask us anything or you want to just interact, you can definitely do it. Right here on the screen, you see hello@ampnow.com. Giovanna is womanning the email and the Twitter feed. She's ready to go with any questions you might have, and we mean it. Liz has been one of the great listeners of ours to ask some questions of us, so let's do the same for her with some good questions. So let's get started. So who is Liz Hall? Liz, I'll let you take that. Let me first provide some backstory. We've worked together. You're obviously at CNA Industries, and I've been fortunate enough to get to watch you lead some team engagement sessions and training and development sessions. And when it comes to culture and what it takes to motivate people, especially at the start of their journey at CNA, it's been amazing to watch. So tell us a little bit about how you got to now and what were the motivating factors in your work.
Right. So for me, I have been with CNA Industries for 16 years. We're nearly a 50-year-old company, privately held, and when I started my journey with them back in 2001, we had about 100 employees, and today we're edging over 700. Actually, as of Tuesday, we'll have over 700 employees, and so it's been all organic growth. So we identify the right people, we bring them in, we train them, and that training never stops. And through that journey, and I really do call it a journey because, and I'm not here to tell you that we've done everything perfect and we're great, we're wonderful. We've made probably more mistakes than we haven't. And I think the thing about us is that we have learned from those mistakes. I certainly have. And I think, the last 9 years, we've been best places to work 7 out of 9 years, and I think those accolades are great, but I don't think they're necessarily proof of what we've done. What I have seen change with us probably the last 2 to 3 years is when I go out to the community or we have vendors come in and they say, gosh, I just can't put my finger on it, but when I come into your organization or I work with your organization, I feel this vibe, I feel this positivity, it just feels good. And in fact, I was getting some blood work done last week, and this girl looked really, really familiar to me, and I asked her how I knew her, and we got to talk, and we found out our commonality with CNA Industries. She works for a health screening company that does our health screening for insurance, and she said, I'm getting ready, my last daughter's graduating, next week, and I want to get back out in the work world. She goes, I've been to that place, I guarantee you a dozen times, and when I leave there, I feel better than when I entered. And I'm taking blood and blood pressure, and so to me, those are the true validations that you're doing something right, you've got something special. When people that aren't a part of what you see every day start saying, gosh, what are you doing? What's in the water? And, it's just, I'm really proud of it because we start hearing from others. And so, when I reflect back and say, gosh, I know things haven't always been this way, so what have we done to get where we're at today? And I do feel that there's truly some things that stand out that we've learned from, and I think other business leaders could learn from.
And we'll definitely get into that today. But so what made you naturally, or was it natural, or what threw you into the mix in your world? What were kind of I sometimes call it like your creation, formulation story. Like how did you move into training development culture? What would you naturally drawn to it? Or?
No, so I actually was recruited into the organization by someone who knew me, and I'd actually worked with them at 2 other businesses, so the initiative was to start a training department. And so I was hired to write the curriculum because we didn't have any at all for the most part. And so that was really what I started. So and that person left within 6 months of my starting, and I built my own team, over the years. And so there's now a team of 14 of us, and it was just really getting to know the people. And I think you learn a lot about yourself on that journey, and you figure out what your strengths are, and you figure out are you able to influence people in a positive way. And that's truly my mission every day, is if I have the opportunity to walk in the door. I mean, I truly feel like when I walk in the door, I have 700 opportunities to make a positive difference. And that's my paycheck. That's what really what makes me happy. So so I think it wasn't intentional, but it was natural, if that makes sense.
Absolutely.
I mean, I didn't say, oh, when I grow up, I'm going to go work for staffing. I mean, it just wasn't even a natural thought process, but it's what happened. And I love the ability to influence people, and I think I'm in a perfect fit to be able to do that.
Yeah, no, you do great work. Obviously, the accolades, 7 of the last 9 years, CNA industry is one of the best places to work in Omaha and probably all across Nebraska. We're fortunate enough to get to work with your team, and it's been we've learned a lot, getting to just come in and observe what you've done, and then obviously work together through AMPT. But more conversations for another day. I guess we're in a pub, so if anybody wants to join us for a conversation after this, we're more than welcome.
Absolutely.
But let's get into what today is, and I'll just simply start and let you go, Liz. But I love this. The headline of this first real slide is, what culture isn't. And let me say this: I guess you could categorize AMPT as a startup, officially tech startup. We, in our world, I've been asked, when we're interviewing for talent, what do you guys got for games in the back? And we're like, well, we've got an old buck hunter game that's broke down. You can go stare at it if you want. And what we know, what you know, which a lot of the best teams that we work with know, is that isn't culture. But talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so I think there's always buzzwords going around, and culture's been a buzzword for a long time. And I think within this next year, the millennials will be the largest population of the work world, and quite frankly, I think they get kind of a bad rap. But and I agree. I'm far from that. So so not for that, but I think people think they hear the ping pong tables or they hear the beer 30 and they think unlimited PTO. They think that if they do those things, if I go put a ping pong table in the break room, that everything's going to be better, and I'm going to attract these millennials, and that's what I need to do, and it couldn't be further from the truth in my perspective. And I have nothing against organizations or startups that have these. I think if that's part of your values and it's a fun, hip place and your ideas are welcome, and that's what you want as an organization, it certainly contributes to the behaviors that you're looking for. But as the cartoon shows there, I mean, you've got to seek the wealth of information that you have of your people there. I mean, you can have all those things, but if they don't have a voice, none of that matters. Yeah. And that's where I feel like some of the publicity about the millennials and what they need and what they want has really been misunderstood. And they're people just like everyone else, and you need to know that millennial just as well as you know the traditionalist or the baby boomer or whomever else you have in your organization, and it's all about the people. Right. And while they're different because they've been raised different, if there's a gap, then it's up to you as the leadership team to figure out what that gap is and provide them the tools to get past that gap. Absolutely.
And I think that segues into what I like about this slide. And is this someone? I think Giovanna asked me the other day. Does KISS mean keep it simple, stupid for you?
Does.
Okay, so talked about how we should keep it. So, I don't know, what did you say? What did Giovanna say the other day? It was.
I have no idea what it was. Yeah, that just dates me. So that's like a
I knew it.
Really
don't worry
old
about
term.
That.
Yeah, so keep it simple, stupid. Again, I think people overcomplicate what culture is, and do they? We have to get this ping pong table. We have to have this, and we have to that. I mean, it's super simple if you choose to make it simple. So to me, culture is about sense of pride, and And I've got that picture there of, are the people on your team 24/7, are they walking around with that corporate logo on their chest, whether it's on corporate apparel or not? I mean, do they go out to an event in the community and talk about how proud they are of what you do and what your organization does? And it truly, to me, is as simple as pride. It's a pride thing. And while there is strategy, alignment, and execution that's tied to it, we don't need to overcomplicate it by enforcing all these 10 different programs to try to satisfy 5 different generations in the workplace. I really think people overcomplicate it, and I think if you keep it simple, some of the things I'm going to talk about today, it's very easily, it takes time and effort, but it's a very simple strategy.
I can already tell 2 things. One, we're going to have another episode in the next 4 months where we come and talk about more, because I already want to get into some stuff with you. And so in the hopes of keeping on time, otherwise Giovanna will get mad at me. One thing that I think is interesting when we talk about pride and we talk about, how do you instill pride, and especially, and if we're just kind of trending in this conversation a little bit about millennial generation, there's a misconception there that, it's like you said, it's the beer 30, it's the ping pong tables. I've seen statistics that say that, millennials need as much as, 1 to 3 moments of one-on-one communication almost every day. And I don't take that as I've heard some leaders talk about, oh, it's because there's constant guidance. Actually, I think it's just a matter of trust. It's a matter of ownership. There's a sense, at least amongst leadership, that, oh, I have to give them. No, pride, having trust, instilling pride, and you need to allow someone to own their position, own their culture. They're a part of that, right? Like, ownership's a big deal, right?
Frankly, I do. But frankly, I think it's a mindset, because I think the millennials need it, but I think so does everybody else.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah.
And I think that that's, to me, that's, I think, the missing piece of where, yes, it takes time and it's an investment. We'll talk about culture as an investment, but with what's changed is technology. Technology's changed our world, and yes, the millennials are raised differently, but the days of giving an annual review and that's the only conversation you have with a person are long gone.
Yeah.
And that's probably one of the biggest things that we've changed in our organization, is that we do one-on-ones with everybody.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter if they're a millennial or not. So yes, it can be tied to millennials, but I don't think it's just them.
So we'll get into that too. Yeah. That's at the very end. That's homework.
So this was kind of contradictory, because you always hear culture eats strategy for lunch, and so then I'm talking, you have to have a strategy, and so it's kind of, I'm talking out of both sides of my mouth, kind of, but you'll see what my strategy is when I talk about it. I mean, I think you have to be very intentional with your culture if you want it to work. And so what type of strategy doesn't work if you strategize and say, okay, well, this month we'll have a ping pong table, this month we're going to do Beer 30. I think that strategy doesn't work, but having a strategy for where you want to go with the culture you want to build is most important.
That's
so,
absolutely.
yeah.
That's great. I've heard that before too. All right, these things right here. I've read these, obviously, preparing for today. I'm going to let you take it. I don't want to steal your thunder, but these are great. Talk to us about these 5 mistakes.
Yeah, so I think it really does. Even before this, there's one that's really not on there about values, but I think we do hire for the wrong reasons. We think that if we get that highly skilled person, maybe they've come from a competitor or they've got years in the business, we think that that's going to contribute to our culture, when really we should be focusing on behaviors and the right type of person.
Yes.
And we'll talk about skill versus behavior in a minute. Focus on task, not purpose. Again, one thing we're hearing more than ever is people want to have a purpose, and they want to know how they contribute to the bigger part of the picture. Absolutely. So whether they are the person that is at the front line or the person at the top, they want to know what their purpose is. Saying we do things, again, that being hypocritical, preaching values that we don't live, right. Saying that we want to have this great fun in the work environment, we don't. Incentivize for the wrong activities. So again, what gets praised gets repeated. When I say incentivize, it's not just money, it's also recognition. We've got to recognize the behaviors that we want to continue to see that build our culture. And so to me, you can incent through recognition and not necessarily money. And then, not investing. And I think the one thing I will tell you with culture, the investment, it is going to be money and it's going to be time, yeah. Both of which we often don't have either. So
I'm glad you said that.
Yeah.
There's also a growing trend, especially if you're dealing with anything about the internet, right? Mm-hmm. That if I can probably find it for free. Mm-hmm. And so it's commoditizing things that are otherwise great tools mm-hmm. to use to help build that. So I'm glad you brought that up. I don't want to get into it because you might be talking about it later on, but when it comes to understanding where someone should invest or what someone should invest in, does that go back to keeping it simple? And that's your talk about how to strategy to the entire process, right? It's not just investing in a cool ping pong table. Although, if we want one, I'm good with that.
Or even like, so let's say we're going to invest in AMP. I mean, that would be an investment in culture. But I can guarantee you, if that's the only thing that you do, I mean, it's not AMP's problem to come and solve that for you. So, I mean, it's got to be part of the bigger picture. And so, while that might be your monetary investment, your time investment is making sure that that's part of your strategy, you know, to get to where you're wanting to go.
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
That's good. Mission why? So that's really going back to kind of tying this all together. Right?
Exactly. So, yeah, so people say, yeah, we have a mission statement, and yeah, our people know it. And I think the mission statement has to be meaningful, and it has to tie to your values. And so I talk about the feel it moments, and this is something that was brought to my attention a few years ago by a good friend of mine, Don Yeager. And Don is a New York Times bestseller. He's worked with a lot of sports teams, and he tells a story. He's on the national board for the Make-A-Wish Foundation. And every meeting that they meet quarterly in some part of the United States, they start out by hearing a wish that needs to be granted. And, you know, they work for free. You know, they serve on this board for nothing. And they all of a sudden forget that this takes time and their own money to serve on this board, because as soon as you hear a feel it moment, a story of why they do what they do, you forget about all of that. And so we incorporated that into our organization to where we started, you know, we were in staffing, primarily healthcare staffing, to where we bring in some of the nurses that work for us. We've even brought in patients that have been treated by some of the medical professionals that have worked for us. We even in our accounting element, we had a woman that talked about her employment of choice is contingent work. You know, she wants to work contract, where it used to be kind of like I would only work contract if I didn't have a job. Now it's this is what I choose to do. She has a disabled child. It allows her to be flexible so she can take them to doctor's appointments. And when you start hearing the impact that you make on people's lives because you're providing them employment, all of a sudden when you walk in that door and you get that problem phone call, you look at it differently. And so I think that your mission has to tie to your why, and it sounds so cliche, but it's amazing to me when you start seeing the emotion on people's faces when they start hearing about how lives are affected. And that's what's so cool about our business. I mean, we can change people's lives, and I think we way underestimate it. So you have to sometimes serve it up for your people to let them see the impact that they're making.
That actually, real quick to jump in, I got handed a question, and it's actually super timely. So Jen emails, how do you integrate that type of purpose into these tasks or in the daily, like, so the feel it moments? How can you give us some examples of how you're letting, like, is it just saying, having a group meeting and celebrating and saying, here's a story we had, or what are some cool ways?
Yeah, so like the feel it moments, those come up in what, you know, we have team huddles, we have twice a year we have company events where we actually, I mean, those are intentional planned moments where we say we're going to bring in somebody we want to share with our employees. But sometimes they're super spontaneous. You know, if someone gets off a good call and they hear a story, you know, from an employee or whomever, we share it, you know, and we'll share it socially. But I'll get into it a little bit more about knowing what your values are. And once you know your values and behaviors looking for, when you see those behaviors, you have to tell the world about it. You have to share it, and you have to talk to your employees about it. And, you know, there's different types of different programs that you can do. And it's probably a conversation for another time to get into some more specific times, but you just have to look for the opportunities and sometimes create opportunities to share. Because if that's something that's important to us, we have to find the time to share it.
Thank you, Jen. If anybody does have any questions, you can always reach out to us at hello@ampnow.com. And by the way, if you catch this at another time on demand, which is available on demand, if you email us, I can still reach out to Liz.
Yeah, and Jen, if you want more specifics, please let Craig know, and I'd be more than happy to follow up with you.
Awesome. So moving on, feel it moments.
So this is an example.
This is it, right? And the video didn't load here, but could you tell?
Yeah. So one of the things that we do, we're doing a lot with video, and sometimes they're not as professional as this. I have someone on my team that actually does some more professional videos. Sometimes they're on iPhones. We'll actually reach out to our contractors out on assignment. We'll just tell them to hook up their iPhone and send us a video of their experience. But we'll do a lot of these on social. We'll do a lot of them on our website to have them talk about why they do what they do, what they like about what we do. And again, we'll share them internally. This probably was a 2-hour project. We have projects that take as little as 10 minutes, you know, where someone will just serve a video and we'll just send it in its raw format. I mean, it's more genuine that way. Anyway, but anytime you can get someone, it's basically a testimonial.
That's awesome.
It's not a testimonial only for your customers, but it's also a testimonial for your employees.
Yeah. Oh, we'll have that up on the web if you wouldn't mind sharing that.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely.
So that'll definitely be available. So values, it's something obviously that's, you know, we deal with on a very regular basis. What we do at AMPT is obviously provide recognition moments for employees of all levels, but, you know, I always tell people, you know, I work with teams like you do too, and, you know, before we start with AMPT, I typically ask the question, how many of you here know what your values are? And, you know, smattering of hands go up, and 6 months into it, they understand very much so what their values are. And more than that, I see the connection to the why. They see where the value of their jobs are because they can directly connect what they're doing with their values. So can you talk more about how these values fit into culture?
So, you know, I think there's a difference between knowing what your values are and living what your values are. And I think that's been probably one of the biggest lessons that I've learned. Back in 2008, 2009, we decided to redo our mission statement and our values. And what we did is we looked at who we were today, that day that we were doing it back in 2008, but then we looked at where we wanted to be 10 years from now. And that was really what we based everything on. And what we have, I mean, and I don't think we got it right away either. I mean, I think this has been our lessons over time, but what we figured out is not only do those values make up who we are and who we want to be, but they have to be in everything that we do, day in and day out. So when we're giving feedback, if someone's not living up to those values, we're having a conversation and reminding them, you know, we've got a value of integrity, and this behavior that you displayed is not in line with our values, and we are going to make a decision to escort you to the intersection of choice out the door, because, you know, we will not tolerate lack of integrity in our business. So, I mean, as much as it serves as good, it's got to be, you've got to be prepared to make hiring decisions and long-term decisions based on those things. Recognition that's probably been our biggest turning point in the last 2 years. You know, we started working with AMPT, and we actually customized the software. This cool thing about it, we made it in our own lingo.
Yeah, that's awesome.
But as you can see in the screenshot there, we added our values, and that's that's one of the mechanisms we use to provide recognition. And we even added a value at this time that we kind of was like an untold value of positivity. That's been a big change for us, and so now we're able to recognize people for positivity in the workplace, and so that really, again, just helps us build on it. We also take our values out to the community, and so all of our community projects have to be in line with our values. So if we're talking about positivity in the workplace, we actually do projects out in the community. It's got to be a common language and consistency. And I think, you know, my last statement there, this is just kind of a saying around our office, is that, you know, what gets praised gets repeated. So if we see things that are doing really well, you have got to take the time and not assume that people know that that's what they need to keep doing. So that's been a big lesson for us.
That's well said.
Yeah.
We get into that a lot, obviously, but I was excited for this one. I don't know if people are familiar with Zappos, obviously. I think you can take it from, but if you hear their CEO talk about who Zappos is, obviously they're an online shoe retailer. Now they do a lot of different things, but they actually say they're a customer service company that just happens to sell shoes.
Right.
And their values, which I'm sure that's why.
Well, yeah, and I don't want to speak on behalf of Zappos, but I think this, to me, like when you research this, and I've done a lot of research and I study, I keep coming back to this every time, and I still think, when I look at this, I feel like, oh my gosh, we have so much room to grow, because I think that it speaks well to who they are, and if you call into them, I mean, or go on their website, you feel this. It's like going back to that feel it thing. I mean, it is everywhere, and I think that's someone that I look up to and aspire. You know, I hope that we can get to that point someday. And you'll notice that it's not just a word. It's, you know, deliver value through service, and I'm sure they have some very specific examples. And to the right there, I have, you know, our little energy bus when you're up at our organization. Right, and again, it's you have to show that it's okay to have fun or whatever that is. But I like to share these, because to me, this is what I aspire to be. Yeah. And I'm not there yet, and we're not there yet. And I think that if you're looking to get more into how do I go about setting values, again, I'd be happy to talk to anybody, but I think they have what's it called, the CEO wrote a book about it. I should even know what it is, and I don't off the top of my head, but it's a great company to research and great values to research. I think it's a great starting point to give you some tips on really what it looks like when it's done very well.
Very well, and authentically too. That is something where you're right, and I mentioned that earlier about them, about they say they're a customer service company that just so happens to sell shoes because their #1 core value is deliver wow through service.
Yes.
Boy, they hit that nail on the head.
Yes.
So this brings us to the hire and fire section. So this isn't a hellfire brimstone conversation, but it's a really interesting one because you brought this up before we were getting started, and I'm really intrigued by this because I haven't really thought of much about the difference between skill and behavior and how we hire versus how we fire, basically.
Yeah, and this is a turning point for our organization too. I think, and I don't even remember when it hit me. I remember that it hit me. It was a very powerful statement that I heard, and we were having quite a bit of turnover, and every time we were letting someone go, it was for behavior, whether it was dishonesty or they weren't coachable or just were cancer in the organization. Started asking myself these questions. We generally hire for skill, but we fire for behavior. If there's a bad culture, why is the culture bad? It's because you've got that cancer and people not happy, and you can see it on their faces, and people walking with their heads down, and someone's not performing, and it's generally because they're not taking the coaching and they're not focusing on what they can control. And when people leave the organization, generally it's due to behavior. And this is actually something I think Aaron Davis says all the time. I think you might have said it on your webinar. He says hire slow, fire fast. I say fire quickly because, and I do think there's a difference between fast and quickly, and the reason why I put that caveat in there is that before we terminate somebody, we always want to take full responsibility for it. I mean, I need to look at myself in the mirror and say, have I done everything that I can do to support this person to give them the tools that they need?
Yeah.
If I can say yes to that, then it's time to let them go. But if I say, I probably could have spent a little bit more time in one-on-ones, or I could have possibly, spent a little bit of time. We always have to look at ourselves first. And so we used to fire quick or fire fast. I think now we fire quickly, and so we've slowed down a little bit to say, we first have to look at ourselves, and if we've done everything, then then we can't feel bad about it, and it's probably the best thing to do.
That's a really good question, actually, or that's a good point. I've not heard it said like that before. So Aaron writes in, do you recommend personality tests? Do you guys use them during pre-assessment?
Oh gosh, that's one of those cliche things. We do assessments. We use DISC. Every employee in our organization goes through DISC, and it took us I will tell you, it took us at least 10 years to embed that into our culture. And so again, it's one of those things, it's a great tool, but if it's just a tool and it's not embedded in the culture, then to me it's pointless. So I think assessments are often misused, and I about gave up on it several times. And again, we're an employment company, but DISC has been very beneficial for us, because now what happens is if every person in the organization, you kind of have to do it all or nothing, I think, because that's what I've learned is that, if I know that you're an I and a high social personality, and I'm a D and I'm very direct, which everyone that knows me knows that I am, have that reputation, I'm learning to adapt. That if you and I have a conflict, we need to sit down, and I've got some tools through DISC that will say, okay, if you're working with an I, here's some things that you need to consider, and it does help us work through the communication challenges in our organization. So I do recommend it, but if you do it, you got to be all in. Yeah,
that's great. That's a good question, Aaron. Thank you so much for that. All right, getting on the right bus. We just saw that, right? People on the right bus. We saw the energy bus thing. I don't know if that's alluding to this, but you have an Excel spreadsheet on, so we'll let you go with that one.
Yeah, so this was I think to support my theory on skill versus attitude. And this is what hit me, and I don't even remember what meeting I was in when I saw this, but this is what really stood out to me. So let's say on a scale of 1 to 10, you're interviewing someone and you give them 100 on skill, maybe a 1 on attitude, because they are like their resume just knocks it out of the park, and that just looks fabulous. And you're thinking they're going to come in, they're going to hit the ground running. That's 100. So let's say I'm like, you know what, they don't have the skill, but gosh, I really, really like them. They're full of charisma, they're really super positive, they're just an awesome person. again, it's 100. So if you take 100 times 1, you get 100. 1 times 100, you get 100. But if I scale back and say, you know what, skill is trainable. So if I have someone that has scores of 50, I know that we've got some great training in place. We've got a plan. I can train them at a 50. And if they've got that great attitude, they're coachable, they've got the right effort. If I take 50 times 50, it's 2,500. So if you look at your end result, your investment up front, you're better off getting someone that has the lesser level of skill, good attitude, because sometimes you get someone who's too over the top, overly positive, they're not super resilient, and maybe they don't have the grit that they need. So that's why I always say, you've got to take a little of both, and when you do, it becomes a very powerful formula to have a great person on your team.
Is it more about the attitude side of things when leaders are looking at hiring, especially small teams, right, where you see the skill at, or at least for the position you're hiring for, it's at or near 100, the attitude isn't where you want it, but the fear is they won't fit.
Right.
Is the attitude more about fit, or is it more about just their general disposition and how they are, which will turn into fit? Coachability.
Coachability, ability to learn. Yep.
That's great.
And I think.
How do you gauge that then in your team? How do you guys?
When I get to my magic interview question, but that's my secret question. And that has been my biggest life lesson in the last probably 20 years of that. Once I figure out how to get that out of someone, because people can BS interviews all day long.
100%.
And there's so many tools out there to help them tell you what you want to hear. And then there was behavioral interview questions for a long time, and people even figured out how to answer those questions. And I think, you can, if you know what's important to you and what it looks like, because if you know what it doesn't look like, you should know what it does look like. Through the interview process, you can get out of them of whether or not and to me, it comes down to grit. That's the word that I think of. That are they coachable? Are they willing to put in the work to get better? And do they have the attitude to come in every day, be better today than they were yesterday?
That's great. That's good. Thank you. Hiring process. So, this, I guess, kind of gets into
a little bit of that. So it leads right into it.
Yeah.
So, again, knowing what your values are, knowing what your purpose is, how are you measuring for those values? Those should be done through some of your interview questions. Are they coachable? And again, my favorite interview question, and so it leads to that. So, you'll ask those general questions. Tell me about a time that you were in a difficult conflict, and how did you overcome it, and what did you learn from it? Those questions you have to ask. But I think from the coachability question, I will ask a question, and it depends on if they have a sports background or what they've done. Maybe they took music through school or whatever. But tell me about a time where you weren't performing at where you needed to be. What did you do to get past that? What were the outcome? And looking back, what did you learn, and what would you do differently if you could do it over? So, and then I'll ask it. I'll break up the question. But what I want to know is, were they willing to put in work to get better? Were they willing to listen to a coach? Were they willing to go out on their own and seek additional resources? Were they able to be resourceful to get to where they needed to be? And were they willing to gut it out? Were they willing to get feedback that they didn't want to hear? And if they're telling me a story that demonstrates that, I know right then and there that they're going to come in and hit the ground running. Now, if they start making up excuses, my coach didn't tell me what the plays were, or my former boss didn't give me all the information. If I start hearing those excuses, boy, I'm turned off real quick.
Yeah.
Because that it's all going to be about blame of someone else.
And it strikes. I should remind everybody listening that you're the executive director for training development, everything regarding anybody signing on, joining up to work for you guys. But what you guys do is this. You really are very good at the hiring process. That's what she said.
Right.
So we're talking to someone who not only works for a company that does it, but then trains those who does this. Is this a process you guys have just through time, or is it always in flux and you're always learning?
Always learning.
Yeah.
Always learning.
So leaders, I've heard this too. Leaders want to set it and forget it, right?
Right.
And it's a one-size-fits-all notion. Okay, here's our process. We know what it is. Boom, done. But you guys are always amending that kind of,
right. And
or at least looking at it.
Yeah, and I think that's where it goes back to the misconception of millennials. I think the reality of it is that, again, this time next year when we're talking, we are going to have 5 generations in the workplace for the first time ever. So the most diverse work group ever. And so again, it's not about the millennials. It's about diversity in the workplace. As your companies grow, they're more diverse. And so as leaders, you know, our number one job is to adapt to our workforce, whatever it takes. And so as your workforce changes, our economy's changing.
Right.
We have to adapt to the economy. So I think that's what people fail to understand, and it's harder to lead now than it ever has been.
Absolutely, it definitely changes. We got about 10 minutes left. So first impressions. These are again where I think the interview process becomes difficult because that is everybody's trying to make the best first impression.
So I think you know, it's all in presentation, and one of the things when I talk about exposing people to culture in the first thing, this is one of those things we've adapted. You know, you'd show up for your first day in work, and you'd say, here's what we expect of you, and we're going to go through all the paperwork. And I mean, it was snoozeville. I mean, like 3 hours of going through sexual harassment, and again, don't get me wrong, those things are necessary, but what a poor first impression to your culture. And so what we do now is that we have a welcome breakfast, and they meet others in the organization, and you know, we have kind of what I call, you know, our ambassadors to our organization, where they just eat, breathe, and drink our company. And how contagious is that if you get them to come and talk about the organization? And yeah, it may be 90 minutes into their day before we start talking about work, but it really gets them engaged. And rather than talking about expectations, we talk about, here's the opportunities that you're going to have to grow and to learn and to own your career. And at the same time, we're saying this is expected of you, but we're presenting it in such a way is that, I mean, it's all mindset, right? So the glass half empty, half full, and it's all in presentation. And I do believe that those ambassadors and what I call culture warriors, those are the people that I call on when even in the interview process. If I have someone I'm really trying to woo and to get into our organization, rather than have them talk to someone on my team or talk to me for 2 hours, go talk to this person. Ask them how they like it. Ask them how it is to work with me. You know, find out what you need to know, and plus it shows our transparency and our trust in each other too. And it helps you earn trust quicker because you're just so, and I feel 100% comfortable when I'm going to send them to someone, and I guarantee you I've not prepped them at all, because then it becomes ingenuine if it seems scripted. You know, it's really easy to sell the culture when you have those people on your side.
On your side, yeah. And this is so, you're reading my mind. It's about sustainability too. I mean, that's really the toughest time for an employee is the first 6 months.
Right.
And that rate of, turnover is growing and, across the board, but the efforts you do at the beginning directly reflect the ability for someone to want to stay longer than 6 months, but that's not the goal. It's 6 months in a day, right? So sustainability.
Yeah, sustainability is a tough one, and this is what I see when I talk to a lot of different people throughout the country at various events and such, and I'll hear them say, well, we coach, and we give recognition, and we do feedback, and we do all these things, but they haven't done the front end.
Yeah.
They don't know what their mission is. They kind of know what their purpose is, but they don't really talk about it, and they don't have the values.
There's no alignment.
Yeah, but the cool thing is, and the most fulfilling thing is that if you do have those things in place, the ongoing communication is easy, but it has to be super intentional, because none of us have time. Okay. I mean, you make time for what's important, right? So we have to be incredibly intentional about scheduling one-on-ones and state of the company or town hall meetings, whatever you want to call them. We have to give feedback, both positive and negative. And for me, I have no challenge giving someone the tough feedback, but I forget to slow down and say, gosh, thank you so much for, yesterday when you did this, and this, and having that extra 5 minutes to do that. Those things are just as important. People want to be coached. Don't assume because someone's at the top of the sales numbers and that they've been here for 5 years that they don't want to be challenged. Absolutely. Because I guarantee you they do. Yep. And providing those development opportunities, again, for your long-term employees or current employees. And I call it an invitation to greatness. I mean, most people don't want to remain the same. And if they got hired into your organization, I say you've got to invite them to greatness. And if you do all those things above there listed, you really are giving them an opportunity to be happy and prideful about your organization.
Yeah. I would say, and that brings us to back to the pride definition. Before we get into that, if anybody's to listen to this and turn off the audio, you can use these slides as a way to build your culture. I mean, this is, you're really literally providing an architecture for building a sustainable culture, and I think a lot of this isn't a one-slide presentation.
Right.
I think that's the one thing that my takeaway, and I hope it is of other people's, is that there is not a one-size-fits-all, and especially the unique nature of our employment, culture, and just the overall like status and state of employment these days is that you cannot have a one price.
There's not an off-the-shelf product. There's not, and again, like I even mentioned with AMPT, that is the cool thing about customization, is that you do have the opportunity to make it your own, but you have to know what you are in order to do that. And so again, it takes us back to pride, and again, I just wanted to do a reminder of what that definition is, because and I'm not going to read it, you can read it to yourselves, but I think the biggest thing is that are your team members walking around with that proudly on their chest and happy to talk about your company, and if they're not, then I think this leads to what my takeaway is, and I'll let you lead into that.
Yeah, that's right. Homework. Everybody likes to see homework.
Yeah, homework.
Before we get into that too, I think it's anytime you start to hear the questions from other people. I had someone message me on LinkedIn the other day, and they were just interested in working for AMPT, and they just wanted to learn more about what we do culture-wise. And we don't have, I don't think, a single piece of AMPT branded clothing, so we weren't literally wearing it around. That's not how they see it, by our actions, by our core values, what we do, what we post, what we say, how we talk about, and that permeates, and people notice that, and they naturally want to gravitate towards that. It's kind of a it's the chicken or the egg, or it's the bee attracted to the honey trap, right?
And that's
we attract like attracts like, in other ways.
And I just think it's so interesting, because you will see organizations that say, well, gosh, we have company apparel day, and they're wearing our company apparel, and it's like, they're wearing it, but are they living it?
It's so
there's
true.
A significant difference.
It's so true. So that transitions into homework. There's more, right? So Liz was, we've talked a lot about, and everybody who's been on co-host with us before, we've been strong about, let's take what we've talked about and let's take it into actionable homework, if you want. It's something you can take starting literally after you get done listening to this. So let's talk about, what does the question mean? Why are we asking? What are you most proud of?
Right. So about 2 years ago, well, actually 3 years ago, we started an initiative, totally soft skills based on the energy bus, and we had a very successful first year of really embedding it into our culture. And I thought we were doing pretty good, and we did. But I really wanted to gauge. I didn't want some formal survey. People get so sick of engagement, blah blah blah. And so, like, okay, what can we do to gauge the temperature of our culture? So we have a pretty open, fun culture. We took a video camera and we just went around randomly and pulled people in and said, okay, a scale of 1 to 10, what are you most proud, or how proud are you? And then why? What are you proud of? And I'll tell you what, it was, you would have thought it was a scripted marketing commercial. They talked about community service. They talked about some of the events that we do. They talked about the energy bus. They talked about different things. And I would say, we averaged at that time probably about a 7 or an 8 from our employees. So we took it a step further. We said, if you're at a 7, what would take you to an 8? And so we got some of those ideas, but we put this video montage together, and we played it at a manager meeting where we had 80 plus our owners and founder. And I mean, there were like tears in the eyes when they were listening to how proud, especially the owners. I mean, they built this business and they're hearing directly from these employees about what made them so proud to work for our organization. And that could have been good enough. We could have said, done our job, we're moving on. And what we did is we went back and said, okay, we've got these 7s, we need to get to 8s. What were some of their suggestions? And we were doing these culture talks. And so I realized that might be a little aggressive for some companies, but I think if you would just survey a handful, whatever that is to you, it could be 2, it could be 10, it could be 100, and ask them that question, what are you most proud of our organization? You could ask the question, how, scale of 1 to 10, where are you at? What's it going to take to get you one step up further? And I think you might be surprised, pleasantly or otherwise, what you hear from your employees. If the person asking the question feels it's confidential at that point, if you don't have an open culture, and if they feel something will be done with it, because you got, like that cartoon showed on the first slide, you've got to listen to what is being said, and you got to take action. Yeah.
So for you, the start with a handful is just going out and randomly or go out and select them, and but also what you're saying, which I think is an important point here, is that action without follow-up is just for the sake of action, and people will really quickly see that's a very lighthearted attempt at doing something. Very shallow.
And you've got to take those people, you got to come back to them and say, okay, here's what we heard, here's what we think, are we on point here, this is what's going to happen. And it may be nothing, but you've got to tell them that.
Yeah, absolutely. And then on top of that, or in addition to, or at another time, you would say the second question would be, what's our core values? Right?
Yeah, what's one of our core values? And I think you can pretty quickly see whether or not they know or they don't. And if they don't, that's okay. I think that's when you're looking in the mirror and saying, gosh, we probably haven't done our job. But it's also a good opportunity for you to say, well, here's what they are. Here's what we're thinking. Do you feel that that's on point? Do you feel like you see those values lived every day? What could we do better to ensure that? And it might be that it's time to revisit them. But I think if you've got someone's captive attention, those are two areas that you could ask. And again, people just want to be heard. Yeah. And I think you may not like what they have to say. And again, you may be pleasantly surprised. But those are great things that you can do to really get the input. And I think that is so much better than on a survey. People want a blanket survey, and then, it's just you're sifting through data, and it seems you have to do it. It's a necessary evil of business, but I think the genuineness, if you truly want to focus on culture, it's got to be a face-to-face conversation.
No, that's great, Liz. So that's good. Two things we can start right now.
Yes.
Take a small handful of teammates or people that you work with and go out and work with them, and then have something in place to follow up from that too. Liz, thank you so much. I'm going to get into connecting. So Liz is great too. If you have questions, she wants to hear about them. She loves talking about this. This isn't just the only time you live this, you breathe this. So email her at lhall@caindustries.com. You got it right there. Also connect with her on the Twitters, as my mom says, or Instagram at LizDum, to live by, and I follow you, and a lot of our team does too. A lot of great stuff, and always great quotes. You always got me pumped up in the morning. So you're up. I also noticed they're a little bit earlier than I am. So
sleep much.
You know what? You got too much energy there, Liz. But everybody can tell. And also LinkedIn. I know you're big on LinkedIn too. So connect with her for more great stuff there. And join us next week as well. Or not next week, excuse me, next month. We're going to be excited to have another co-host that I'm going to be announcing here shortly. So again, join us. But again, Liz, thank you so much for joining us. I had a lot of fun. Yeah, and you'll definitely be back. We'll have more conversations, I'm sure. And I want to say thank you to Mike and the team here at the Old Pub. If you're ever in downtown Lincoln and you want to drop by and say hi to the AMP team, we are right next door. So thank you to everybody here. And again, thank you all of you out there who have taken time to listen to us, and join us for next time of the AMP webinar series. Thank you.